yes, today we are going to talk about some of the challenges and best practices associated with hiring volunteers. Some nonprofits feel that an in-depth background check is overkill or too expensive, but there are legitimate reasons to screen every one of your volunteers. Some of the most common reasons we see is to protect vulnerable populations, provide a safe environment, and protect the organization's reputation. Before we get into it, I need to lay some background. The Fair Labor Standards Act, or FLSA, is the federal law which sets minimum wage, overtime, record keeping, and child labor standards. The Wage and Hour Division of the U.S. Department of Labor enforces the FLSA laws. The FLSA is federal law, but New York State has their own definition of volunteer and associated laws as well. So New York State defines a volunteer as a person who works for the nonprofit making institution under no contract of hire, express or implied, and with no promise of compensation other than reimbursement for expenses as part of the conditions of work. So to break this down a little more, in the state of New York, volunteers cannot expect or receive compensation for services. And again, reimbursement for expenses is not considered compensation. Any compensation beyond reimbursement for expenses, though, moves a person from the category of volunteer and into the category of employment. And yes, a gift card would count as payment. And New York State volunteers also cannot displace any genuine or paid employees. They can only do tasks traditionally reserved for volunteers. This law is a little more confusing. The DOL does not have a set definition of what those tasks include, ironically, but the DOL's position then is that a volunteer cannot provide services that would normally be or would reasonably be expected to be performed by a paid employee. And New York State volunteers also cannot be forced to do things involuntarily. They can have no forced hours and in fact can only work certain hours. So this is a great segue into our next section, which is talking about some challenges. For the most part, nonprofits have busy seasons where they need to get a ton of volunteers in and through the system. In the past, the standard procedure would be to fill out a consent form on paper and fax it to your CRA. This process could possibly be super quick with the right applicant, but it's also equally possible that it does take unnecessarily long. We work around this by having a software that allows the end user to send an order invite with just the applicant's first and last name, as well as their email address. And once they fill out their information, we start working on it immediately, and this saves hours of copying information. Another issue that this brings up is consent. Long gone are the days of faxing those over as well. Our system captures consent, authorization, and disclosure all through the online form, streamlining your process and making the applicant's experience frictionless. The last major concern is, of course, cost. A lot of CRAs have what we call box packages. Those are the ones that you have to squeeze into even if it doesn't quite fit. At CI, we do have a standard nonprofit package, but we also have the ability to customize your package to fit your exact needs. In any case, if you're going to hire volunteers this year, we do have some recommendations for you to think about. The first ties right back into cost. New York State criminal searches go through the New York State Office of Court Administration, or the OCA. They currently charge $95 per name to search using their database. So we have a direct answer in our service, Cursory Indicator New York. CINY, as we call it, takes a cursory look at an applicant, and if there is no adverse information, then there's no need to run the OCA. CINY is compliant when there is no adverse information, costing about a third of what the OCA charges. It is also included in the nonprofit best practices package. Another recommendation we have would be to have a professional CRA do any sex offender registry searches. In New York, anyone in the Zoom is able to go find level 2 and level 3 information from the public New York State Registry. However, level 1 information is locked behind a gatekeeper, and you would need to call in and try to get the information that way. We have a dedicated representative at the registry that we are able to go directly to for those searches. If you take nothing else away from the session, whatever you do not think you are covered by a free background check. Free checks are almost always either incomplete or inaccurate, and they can put your organization at a serious risk. Trust the professionals.